Once upon a time, there was an old man and woman who lived very happily. They liked to tend to their small plot of land, growing their own fruit and vegetables. They had each other, with so many years of love between them, and they had their beloved pet dog, Shiro. The couple loved this dog so much they would always give him the best of the vegetables when they were picked. They gave this dog all their love and affection, and he truly was a member of their small, happy family. Shiro, the white dog, was a wolf-type dog, and very loyal to his master. Every day when the man came back from tending to his land, he would go out onto the veranda of his house, and he would call his dog. Then he would give Shiro the pick of the best tasty vegetables from the plot. It was their daily ritual. But not everyone enjoyed this tradition. Next door there lived another old man and woman. But this couple did not like dogs at all, and they especially didn't like Shiro. The daily ritual disturbed them, they said. The dog's barking annoyed them, and they generally didn't like that dog. One day, when the old man came home from tending to his land, Shiro was waiting for him, wagging his tail and barking. The old man wondered what the matter was as Shiro led him around to the back of the house. There Shiro began digging his claws into the earth under a large yenoki tree. The old man had no idea why Shiro was doing this, but it seemed like Shiro had caught the scent of something buried there. So the man went and fetched a spade, and then began digging in the ground under the tree. After a while of digging and digging, he began to see the sparkle of gold in the earth. He moved the earth with his hands, and he picked from the ground a handful of gold coins. The more earth he uncovered, the more coins he found, until he had a whole pile of valuable coins. Shiro sat proudly by, happy that he could repay his master for all the love and affection he had given to him. But next door, the bitter old man peered from his window, annoyed that his neighbor had found such luck. The old man called to his wife, and, astonished, they carried the treasure into their house together. The couple were so proud of Shiro for finding this. They cuddled and hugged him even more than they had before. But next door, the bitter old man had an idea of his own. If Shiro could find treasure in their garden, maybe he could find it in his too. So the next day he asked if he could borrow Shiro for a while. The old man hesitated. He knew his neighbors disliked his dog, so why would they want to borrow him now? But he was also too kind a person to say no, so he consented on the condition that they take care of his beloved dog. The neighbor grabbed Shiro and took him to his own garden. There, he said to the dog, "You found treasure in your garden. Now find some in mine. I want to be rich too." The man was so mean to the dog. Shiro began to dig in the ground in his neighbor's garden just to stop him from grabbing his fur so tightly. He dug and he dug. The man thought this meant there was treasure in the ground of his garden too. But the more Shiro dug, the more nothing emerged, except a foul smell. All Shiro had found was something very rotten indeed. The man was quite angry now, and he blamed Shiro for this. Why, he had uncovered a haul of treasure for his master, yet all he found here was something rotting and stinky. He was so angry he shooed the dog away, and Shiro trotted back around to his home, where he was pleased to be again. His owner, of course, didn't know how badly his dog had been treated, but the next time he saw his neighbor, he had to listen to his annoyance over the lack of treasure being found in his garden. He expressed his sadness for his neighbor not having the same good luck. Then he went back home to his loving wife and his beloved dog. One day his wife was grinding rice in a mortar to make rice cakes. Shiro was being playful and gently licked the mortar. The old woman chuckled at the cheeky dog and patted his head. But then a strange thing happened. As she continued to grind the rice in the mortar, she noticed she now had twice as much as she had before. The rice had doubled in size, which was surely impossible. She looked down at her dog, Shiro, and she blinked her eyes. Could it be possible? First the buried treasure under the tree, and now an abundance of rice for cakes. Was Shiro really making this happen? Was he a magical dog? She made the best rice cakes that day she thought she had ever made. She and her husband and Shiro sat out on the veranda that afternoon and enjoyed the cakes. Their envious neighbor was watching them from his window and came out to ask how she had made such large and fluffy rice cakes. She told him all about the mortar that Shiro had licked, and the neighbor asked if he could borrow it so he could also make abundant rice cakes. Again, the old man and woman were too kind to say no, so the woman handed over the mortar to her neighbor. When a few days had passed and the mortar hadn't been returned, the old man went to his neighbor's house and asked for it back. The neighbor replied that the mortar was nothing but an ordinary mortar, and his rice cakes had not come out like theirs had, and that his rice had not doubled in quantity. He said he had been so annoyed at this unfairness, he threw the mortar to the ground and broke it. The old man was sad to hear this. That was the mortar that Shiro had licked, that had provided such wonderful rice cakes, and his neighbor had carelessly broken it. He asked for the broken pieces to be given back to him, which his neighbor did with an amused smirk on his face. "What would you want with broken pieces?" he asked. "What use could they possibly be?" It was the principle of the thing. It was his mortar, after all. But the old man thought perhaps his neighbor was right, and he scattered the broken pieces in his garden. It was late in the autumn of the year. The wind in the air had a chill, and all the leaves had fallen from the branches of all the trees. The garden was bare and barren, but as soon as the pieces of the broken mortar landed at the foot of the trees, they began to shoot and grow, and cherry trees and plum trees were blossoming as if it were a perfect spring day. Soon the people who lived nearby and who were passing through began to notice, and they began to remark on this miracle. And soon the old man and his garden were famous throughout the land. People began knocking at the old man's door and asking to see this wondrous garden in bloom so late in the year. One day there was a knock at the old man's door, and when he went to answer it, he was astonished to see a noble knight standing there. The knight explained to the old man that his lord had a garden with a cherry tree that the lord was so fond of. But the cherry tree had withered and wouldn't be revived. The knight said many had tried to help the tree by watering and feeding it, but nothing could bring it back from its darkness. Then the knight had heard of this old man who could bring withered trees back to life, and so here he was, asking for the old man to help him. The old man always liked to help others if he could, so he picked up a few of the broken pieces of the mortar from his garden, and he took them with him as he followed the knight to the lord's villa. When they arrived, the lord looked at the old man and he asked, "Are you the man who can bring withered trees back to life and make them bloom again, even when the season has passed?" The old man thought and then, with some surprise, answered, "Yes, that is me." Then he went out into the garden and scattered the bits of broken mortar under the trees. The results were astounding and very immediate. The favoured old cherry tree, which by rights should not have flowered again, burst back into life, and the cherry blossom bloomed pale pink and white. The Lord was overjoyed at the sight of his beloved tree blossoming once more as if it were the early spring. The Lord gave the old man gold and silver and a casket of his best wine from his cellar. He proclaimed that the old man should, from that moment onwards, be called the man who makes the trees blossom. Now, when the old man's envious neighbour heard this, he was more livid at the situation than he had ever been before. Now the people were honouring this man when all he had done was have good luck. The neighbour would have his own back. It was an unfair situation, and he would make it fair again. So he gathered up the small fragments of the mortar that had remained on his floor after he had given the most parts of it back to the old man, and he set off to the Lord's villa. When he drew near to the large, magnificent house, he walked along, calling himself, "Here comes the man who makes trees blossom. Here comes the man who brings withered trees to life again." On hearing the call, the Lord assumed it was the old man coming along near his house again, and so he sent word for the old man to be asked in. When the neighbour entered instead, the Lord peered at him. He looked different, so he asked, "Are you the old man I called, the man who makes trees blossom?" "Yes, I am," replied the neighbour. "This is strange indeed," said the Lord. He peered, and he peered at the old man in front of him, and the more he looked at him, the more he was quite sure it wasn't the same man who had called here before. "You are not the same man who came to my house before, and who brought my withered trees back to life," he said. "Does he now have an apprentice? Are you his apprentice?" The man saw that he couldn't fool the Lord into thinking he was the same man, so he quickly came up with a cunning reply. "I am the true man who can turn withered trees into blossoming trees once more. I am the one who can make trees bloom even out of season," he said. "The man you saw before was only my apprentice." "Indeed," said the Lord. "If this is the case, then you must be even more powerful than he is. You must be able to bring trees back to life even better than he can. Come, let me see your powers in action." He led the man out into his garden, and he told him that if he could perform a better trick than the other old man, he would give him riches more than he could imagine. This old man wasn't only jealous of his kind old neighbour and all he had acquired, he was also greedy, and he wanted more than his neighbour had. He wanted to have riches that were more than he could imagine. So he approached a withered old tree in the Lord's garden, and he sprinkled the small pieces from the mortar that he still had at its roots. They all waited and watched the tree, but nothing happened. Thinking he hadn't sprinkled enough of the broken mortar pieces at the tree's feet, the man took out more from his pocket and sprinkled it again. But no bud sprang into life. No leaves emerged fresh and green. Instead, the tree looked even more sorrowful than it had before. Even worse than that, as the man took out the broken bits of mortar from his pocket, some of it was no more than dust. The breeze lifted the dust in the air and blew it into the face of the Lord. The Lord was most displeased and called the old man a fool and a charlatan. The old man tried to protest, but the Lord was already calling for his guards to escort this cheating fool from the premises. As the old man turned to try and explain himself, the dust from the broken mortar swirled in the air, and there he could have sworn he saw Shiro sitting outside the garden wall and smiling at him. "That damned dog," the man said as the guards ushered him away. Whether Shiro was really there that day and was indeed a magical dog, we can only wonder at. Whether Shiro brought all the luck to his beloved owners and found them gold and silver and made them a magical mortar is for you to imagine. What we do know is the old man and woman, the kind-hearted and good man and woman, were now rich. They had the gold and silver coins Shiro had unearthed in their garden under the enoki tree, and they had the gold and silver the Lord had given them too. What's more, the Lord was now certain that this old man was the one true man who makes the trees blossom, and he employed him to come back to his garden every autumn and perform the same trick. So, every year, when the summer days cooled and the dark evenings began to edge in earlier, the man and woman would take a new mortar. Shiro would give it a lick, and they would make the best rice cakes they had ever tasted. Then the old man would break the mortar into tiny pieces, and he would take the pieces back to the Lord's house. There he would sprinkle them on the withered, cold trees, and everyone would stand back in awe as the blossom slowly emerged on the buds, and the whole garden was radiant with the feel of spring once more. And every year, when the trick was completed, Shiro and the old man would walk home again with their payment, and they never again had to worry about money or food. Each night the old man would perform their nightly ritual. No matter how rich they were now, he would still take Shiro out onto the veranda and feed him the freshest, choicest vegetables, and Shiro would bark out his delight, and the man and woman next door never again troubled about the dog or asked to borrow him so they might become rich, though they were still quietly envious. When the moon emerged and the stars blinked brightly, Shiro would settle down in front of the fire and rest his paws. The man and woman would climb into their soft, warm bed, and they would snuggle down and settle themselves. They had always been happy and content with what they had. They loved their dog, and they loved each other. And what more do you need in life? Now they had everything they could ever want. It was still this love and this family bond that made them happiest of all. As the old man and woman breathed in deeply and felt themselves begin to drift into their sleep, Shiro would tiptoe upstairs and softly leap onto their bed, and he would settle himself right there by their feet. The old man and woman never minded. Shiro was their family, and the three of them would drift into a peaceful sleep together.